The deputy stepped out of his cruiser and took one long, incredulous look at my 83-year-old grandfather. There he was, bare-chested, skin sunburned to a crisp that looked like it could fry bacon, clutching a rainbow trout in one hand and a can of Coors in the other. The poor officer turned toward the HOA lady beside him, who was flailing her arms and pointing at my grandfather as though he'd just broken out of prison. "So let me get this straight," the deputy said slowly, rubbing his temples like he'd been dragged into a nightmare on his day off. "You called 911 because this man was whistling while fishing, on his own dock." My grandfather's leathery face broke into a grin so sly it could have sold snake oil. "Actually, son," he said, taking an easy swig of his beer, "it ain't just my dock. I own the whole damn shoreline." The deputy's sunglasses came off, and I swear his eyes nearly popped out. "Ma'am," he said, turning to the HOA president, whose face was cycling through every shade of red Crayola ever made, "you might want to take a seat. My name's Arthur Mitchell, and I'm a freelance graphic designer, someone who loses track of weekdays when I'm deep in a project. But my grandfather, Grandpa Mitchell, never forgets anything. Not a fishing hole, not a sunrise, and definitely not a square inch of land he's owned since 1973. He built his cabin out here in Cedar Ridge Bluff back, when it was all towering Douglas firs, glass-clear water, and the occasional black bear rummaging for garbage cans. Nowadays, that same lakeshore has been rebranded into Cedar Ridge Shores, a place so posh that folks bring air fryers to their prosh. They are fryers to their mosquitoes don't respect their imaginary no-fly zones around imported tick furniture, and leading that new wave of suburban conquest was none other than HOA President Brenda Kensington, a retired pharmaceutical sales rep who treated the HOA rulebook like it was scripture. Her favorite words were community standards, property value protection, and decorum expectations. Her least favorite phrase, the one Grandpa loved to repeat, "It was here before you were." Brenda had moved into Cedar Ridge Shores 3 years earlier and ran for HOA president almost immediately, vowing to restore dignity to the waterfront. She won in a landslide, not because people liked her, but because no one else wanted the job. Within her first month, she introduced 17 new bylaws, banning wind chimes over 12 inches, mandating earth tone-only outdoor furniture, and even restricting decorative flags to pre-approved occasions. The battle between Brenda and my grandfather began with a letter printed on HOA letterhead, thick enough to qualify as plywood. "Dear Mr. Mitchell, per HOA Rule Section 12, subsection B, shirtless seniors are strongly discouraged from occupying visible areas during daylight hours, as it may negatively impact property values and community aesthetics." Grandpa used that letter to wrap fish guts before tossing them into his compost bin. The next week, she cited his dock as unsanctioned structure. "Thou art for one, never mind that it had been standing since Nixon was president." Then she targeted his aluminum canoe, labeling it a non-compliant watercraft because it didn't fit the HOA's approved color palette of navy, forest green, or burgundy. She'll find him for having 4 unregistered bird feeders, attracting non-native species, even though he'd been feeding the same mallard family for 15 years. She accused his bamboo wind chimes, handmade by my late grandmother, of creating noise pollution. And when Grandpa played Amazing Grace on his harmonica one sunset, she filed a formal complaint for audible personal instrument disturbance. When Grandpa hosted his traditional 4th of July fish fry, a celebration older than Brenda herself, she tried to have the health department shut it down for being an unauthorized shoreline engagement. The inspector showed up, ate 3 plates of Grandpa's beer-battered walleye, and told Brenda she should find a new hobby. Grandpa laughed off most of her crusade with the patience of a man who'd outlasted 3 dogs, 2 pickup trucks, and 1 president who resigned on television. He'd wave at Brenda from his dock as she stood on her perfect lawn with her clipboard, documenting violations like she was preparing evidence for a federal case. But then came this Saturday morning when everything shifted. I was visiting that weekend, sipping coffee on the porch, when two men in matching Cedar Ridge Shores polo shirts strutted down toward Grandpa's dock. They carried a heavy chain and a sign that read, "Property of Cedar Ridge Shores, HOA, by order of the board." "Morning, gentlemen," Grandpa called, setting down his tackle box. "You boys lost. The community pool's half a mile that way. We're here on official HOA business," the taller one said, puffing up his chest, his voice cracking halfway through. "This dock violates community standards and is hereby impounded until proper permits are obtained." Grandpa laid his fishing rod down slow, real slow, the way an old gunslinger might before a duel. "Is that so? And what authority does your little club think it has over my property?" "The HOA owns all common areas, including the shoreline," the shorter one piped up, already looping the chain around a post. "It's in the covenant." "Interesting," Grandpa said, pulling out his phone. "Hold that thought while I ring up my lawyer. Haven't talked to Harris in a while? He's gonna love this." See? What Brenda Kensington and her clipboard battalion didn't know. What no one in that HOA had even thought to check was that back in 1981, when the old Cedar Ridge Lodge went bankrupt, my grandfather bought the entire eastern shoreline. Every inch of waterfront from Dock 12 all the way to the northern cove where the old boat launch used to sit. His name was on the deed, recorded and filed at the county clerk's office. Probably gathering dust since the Clinton years. Over time, as Cedar Ridge Shores expanded, they'd unknowingly built their walking paths, memorial benches, kayak racks, and gazebos right on Grandpa's land. Every board, every nail, every no littering sign on property that legally belonged to him. But Grandpa never said a word. Not when they added Bluetooth speakers to the gazebo. Not when they installed a bocce court. Not even when they threw their annual HOA appreciation dinner on what they proudly called Kensington Beach, which was, in truth, the same spot where Grandpa had taught me to skip stones when I was 5. He just waited, patient as a heron, biding his time for the right moment to strike. And that moment finally came when Brenda, in what she clearly believed was her finest hour, called 911 to report what she described as aggressive and menacing paddling in community waters. The deputy who showed up, Officer Lawson, young and probably hoping for an actual crime, took her complaint with all the weary professionalism of a man realizing he'd been dispatched to referee the world's most ridiculous feud. Brenda had come fully armed with a 3-ring binder bursting with photos, dates, and what she called evidence of pattern behavior. Among the pages was a blurry shot of Grandpa's bare chest, which she absurdly claimed qualified as indecent exposure to minors. Mind you, the nearest minor was her own grandson. Living all the way in Portland, he's creating a hostile environment, she insisted. Her voice climbing so high that Deputy Lawson's eyes started twitching. He whistles obscenely. He feeds unauthorized wildlife. And yesterday, I saw him pour beer into the lake. I was pouring one out for my wife, Grandpa said quietly, taking a sip. 20 years gone this week. She always wanted her ashes in the lake. Every anniversary, I share a beer with her. The deputy's expression softened slightly, but Brenda was unstoppable. That's pollution. It's probably a legal dispersion of human remains. I demand you arrest him immediately. Officer, it might be helpful if we first establish exactly whose property we're standing on. Came Grandpa's phone again. I've got my surveyor on speed dial, and Judge Stevens at the county courthouse owes me a favor from when I fixed his boat motor. Why don't we get some official documentation out here? Within an hour, Grandpa's dock had transformed into a convention of county officials. The surveyor arrived with a full set of equipment, meticulously measuring the shoreline. A clerk from the records office showed up with a banker's box full of old deeds and filings. Even Judge Stevens appeared, appearing still in his golf attire, clearly entertained by the spectacle. The surveyor's results were crystal clear. Every HOA improvement along the eastern shore, from decorative lampposts to regulation garbage bins, was sitting squarely on Grandpa Mitchell's private property. The deed was solid, the boundaries unambiguous, and the HOA had been trespassing for years. "This can't be right," Brenda sputtered, flipping through the documents as if sheer willpower might conjure a loophole. "We've maintained this shoreline for years. We've spent thousands of HOA funds on improvements." "Interesting," Judge Stevens murmured, stroking his chin. "You said HOA funds, as in dues collected from residents, spent on private property without the owner's permission." Brenda's face drained of color faster than water from a punctured pool float. Deputy Lawson, who had been quietly taking notes, finally looked up with genuine interest. "Ma'am, are you saying the HOA has been using member dues to improve private property without authorization?" "That would be misappropriation of funds," the judge added casually. "Possibly fraud, depending on how it was represented to the members. Certainly worth investigating." Grandpa stood tall on his dock, a can of beer in hand, looking like he'd just stolen the world's candy store. "I'm a reasonable man," he said. "I haven't complained about trespassing, haven't asked for rent in 10 years. But when you try to chain up my dock and call the police on me for fishing on my own property, that's where I draw the line." The sheriff's department opened an official investigation that very day. Brenda tried to convene an emergency board meeting, but half the board was already at the shoreline, staring at their phones and calculating exactly how deep their legal trouble ran. Meanwhile, Grandpa's lawyer, Harris, sent a formal cease and desist letter demanding the removal of every HOA installation from Grandpa's property within 10 business days. The list was long: 3 gazebos, a pickleball court, a meditation garden with a Zen fountain, and a pergola with built-in Bluetooth speakers and color-changing LED lights. The HOA scrambled to hire a lawyer of their own, who glanced at the deeds and documents and promptly advised compliance and prayer for mercy regarding the decade-long trespass. Demolition began the following Monday. Crews carefully dismantled years of HOA improvements, while Brenda stood on the public road with binoculars, documenting each removed board like she was observing war crimes. Grandpa wasn't done. Once the shoreline was cleared, he did something that left Brenda in what witnesses later described as apoplectic shock. He leased the entire waterfront to the Cedar Ridge Fishing Club, a local organization that had been seeking a new home since its previous site was turned into condos. Within a week, a massive wooden sign went up: "Private shoreline property of Grandpa Mitchell. No cars beyond this point." The club members, mostly retirees and weekend anglers, settled in quickly. They built cleaning stations, a small boat launch, and most importantly, enforced Grandpa's single rule: non-members could not access the shoreline without explicit permission. Brenda tried every tactic in the book. She claimed the lease was invalid, argued that the HOA had acquired rights through adverse possession. She even attempted to involve the city council, showing up with a PowerPoint on the weaponization of waterfront property against community values. The city attorney shut her down in less than 5 minutes. "Mrs. Kensington," he said, "the property owner has every right to lease her land as she chooses. Your personal objection is irrelevant. The misuse of HOA funds on private property, however, is very relevant to the ongoing criminal investigation." The final blow came when local news picked up the story. The segment, "HOA President Calls Cops on Elderly Veteran, Gets Schooled in Property Law," went viral within hours. Footage of Brenda lunging at a reporter's microphone while screaming about biased media and the fishing industrial complex became an overnight meme. Someone had also live-streamed Deputy Lawson, politely but firmly escorting Brenda off the dock while she waved a hastily made sign reading, "HOA Lives Matter." The forensic audit revealed that over $70,000 in HOA funds had been spent on Grandpa's property. The district attorney charged Brenda with misappropriation of funds and fraudulent use of HOA resources. At her arraignment, standing in her best pantsuit, Brenda listened as the charges were read. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. "This is a conspiracy," she declared, her voice quaking. "That man has poisoned this community against progress and property values." "I'll take that as not guilty," the judge said dryly. "Bail is set at $10,000. The trial was swift. Ironically, Brenda's own meticulously compiled records, the very binder she used to prove Grandpa's violations, became the evidence that convicted her. She was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and $45,000 in restitution to the HOA. As the judge read the sentence, Brenda's knees buckled. $45,000, she gasped, gripping the defendant's table. That's your entire retirement savings? The judge deadpanned. Should have thought of that before spending other people's money on someone else's property, he added. The court was adjourned.